Looking at the track record of most of my entries, I kind of only go really far back when it kind of is, I don't want to say necessary, but only when certain things kind of pop up and I decide that, if it's an old movie, I'll watch it. If it's no television show, I'll watch it. But most of the things for the podcast so far have been, most of my entries have been, within the last couple decades, the last 20, 25 years at least. So very rarely do I go too far back purposefully. Unless it's, I really want to talk about something or some actor's history of things. And, this popped up and I was watching it and I was just like, wow, this is just still such a great movie. And it still holds up very well today. My Cousin Vinny is just this really, really excellent story that's just done in this pure early 90s fashion with a tremendous cast to kind of back it up. Now, first of all, we have to say that this is a Joe Pesci film. Now, it's a Joe Pesci film pretty much before most of the things that people would kind of really put a label on him for. But then when you really look at that time frame, anything around the late to from the mid 80s to the late 80s to the early 90s, his, track record is pretty much all over the place. He doesn't really have much under his belt that would stop you and make you feel like he is actually typecasted in some way. He's really not. He's more comedy orientated than I think people give him credit for. The first ever time he's ever viewed as a gangster in some way is when he plays the main bad guy in the Moonwalker mini video for Michael Jackson. That's the first time that I can see, unless, Once Upon a Time in America, you would consider that kind of gangstery. I don't really remember that film all that well. I just know that it was, he was talking about being, Italians in America during that time frame that Once Upon a Time in America is set in. But after that, it sort of just goes right into something like Lethal Weapon, then Home Alone, and it's all comedies. His first and only real serious gangster role is Goodfellas. And yes, Goodfellas comes out before My Cousin Vinny, but it comes out the same year as Home Alone, and only a year after Lethal Weapon 2, and those are both roles where he's not taking as serious. It's not serious roles. He's meant to be a comedic character. He's a supporting character in Lethal Weapon 2. He's a supporting character in Home Alone. Both of those roles aren't serious in any way. So then you have Goodfellas, which is a tremendous film, and then you jump forward, and then you get The Super in 91, and then 92 comes around, and there he is in Lethal Weapon 3, Home Alone 2, and then he's got this tremendous film, My Cousin Vinny. So to me, I guess maybe it's this almost like a Mandela effect feeling you get when you think about Joe Pesci. You automatically think about gangster-orientated films in some way, shape, or form. But truthfully, the only two off the top of my head that I automatically relate to him is Goodfellas and The Bronx Tale. Most of these movies came out before or around those two films, so he's got more comedy under his belt than he's got anything else. So this is a Joe Pesci film that really highlights his capabilities as sort of this comedian that I guess maybe nobody really thought, but then again, it's really what he was known for. Now, I was really young back then, so I don't really recall my extensive knowledge of actors or their film history and whatnot. I just grew up in this kind of realm, and I never really paid attention like that. So now, looking back on it as, a man that just reveres this old time frame of movies, I see it differently now. I see that I always thought that Joe Pesci had very few comedy things going on, and he was more along the lines doing the movies the same way, it was Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. It was all these gangster roles and serious roles. It was Godfather. It was Scarface. It was all these films. Joe Pesci's really not there for any of that. He's not really part of that same, circle of all of those types of films that revolved around this small group of actors that everybody remembers it. Then you have his supporting actress in Marissa Tomei. Now, for me, I think a lot of people also might agree is that this is Marissa Tomei's kind of launch pad, because, it kind of put her on the map and everybody knows her for this movie and they kind of think it's her first movie. It's not, but it is like her first movie that is better received than anything else beforehand. So like she's done a bunch of TV things before that, but really what happened before that, which is a movie that I also love called Oscar, which is a comedy with Sylvester Stallone. It was Sylvester Stallone's way of trying to like also make comedy roles and step out of that serious light. And that's one of her first most serious roles as an actress. It's the first time she does something as a sort of supporting character and part of the main cast. And that's the year prior to My Cousin Vinny. But everybody knows Marissa Tomei from My Cousin Vinny, and that's kind of the first movie for her to a lot of people, which is understandable because she's amazing in this film. You know, the two of them have such great on-screen chemistry, and I think she was like really young when the film like was coming out too. Like I think Joe Pesci was in his early 40s or around his 40s, and Marissa Tomei was in like her 20s, and they just have really, really good on-screen chemistry as this couple where, you know, they're out in the middle of nowhere. So let's just go straight into what My Cousin Vinny is really about. So those who are laymen to the My Cousin Vinny universe. My Cousin Vinny is essentially these two guys. One of them is played by Ralph Macchio. I forgot to mention, he's also in this film. Ralph Macchio is out traveling with a buddy of his, and then they get pulled over and they get arrested for what they think is for stealing a can of tuna fish. And what it actually turns out to be is the store they had just left was robbed at like minutes later, and the guy who was running the store was murdered. So they are technically considered the last ones in the store. Though, you know, as the story progresses, you learn that isn't the case, but they're the ones that are getting pinned with the murder. Especially considering they're not from this town. It's like Hicksville, America in the 90s, so it's meant to play off of that. And, you know, of course it is murder, and they take murder really seriously back then to the extent where they wanted to give them the chair, essentially. So they have to get lawyers, and Ralph Macchio's character gets his cousin Vinny in because Vinny is an aspiring lawyer. He's not a full lawyer. He's not even like, this is his first case, essentially, that he's getting. And he's getting it so we can try to get his cousin, Ralph Macchio, off of this murder trial. And he thinks that if he can win it, then it'll all be, you know, it'll be a good omen for his up-and-coming career. So he shows up Middletown, America, and a bunch of antics happen while he's trying to help solve the case. And he's actually doing a really good job with it. It's just that he's this New York-style character in the Midwest, you know, somewhere in, you know, I forget where it actually takes place in, but he's going up against, you know, some hardcore evidence strictly for the fact that, you know, they're basing everything around the car that they're driving. Now, one of the best scenes in that movie is all the way at the end when the trial is basically almost at its end. It's closing out, and he pulls Marissa Tomei in because Marissa Tomei's character comes from a line, a family bloodline, a history of, you know, people being mechanics. So she was raised around mechanics, and she has extensive knowledge of being a mechanic in cars and car history and things of that nature. So she helps disproves that and wins the case. Lo and behold, this is also going against the judge who hates Joe Pesci's character, Vinny. And the judge is played by Fred Gwyn, who most may or may not know is actually the guy who played Fred Munster. Whoever the Father Munster, I'm totally blanking out on that. The Father Munster from the Munsters TV show from back in the 50s and 40s and 50s, I think it was. So that black and white Munster show, that's who Fred Gwyn is. This is close to the end of his career, so I think this is one of the last movies he did, and he plays the judge, and he really hates Joe Pesci's character. He hates Vinny all the way up and down the street because he's constantly being a New York guy in this like Alabama-like town, and they just don't want anything to do with him, and they still all believe that these two guys, Ralph Macchio and his friend, committed the murder. So he's trying to disprove the murder while actually winning and making some good points, and they all kind of hate him for it, though it is, you know, played out in a certain way that I'm not going to go too deep into, because My Cousin Vinny is a movie that's 30 years old right now. You know, it's 1993. If you haven't gotten your hands on it at all, and you haven't seen My Cousin Vinny at all, it should definitely be a movie that you should go back and revisit. It's just so entertaining, and it's such a good Joe Pesci movie. It's a fantastic 90s movie, and it's just a comedy that really can withstand like the test of time. because you just go back to it and you can recall the time and you can recall all the stuff that he's going through. And it's just a really good, I think there was, when my wife was really in depth in the Amber Heard Johnny Depp case, she got really in depth in what's called LawTube, which is essentially the lawyer side of YouTube. So you watch a bunch of YouTube channels for lawyers who that's what they do now. Instead of representing people, they just break down cases and they break down scenes and movies and stuff. I've seen that a bunch of these channels have like My Cousin Vinny up there as like examples of things to do right, when it comes to your trials and your cases and how you handle them. So it has some substance in actual the law universe. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know any of that. I just know that this film is a film that just pops up every now and then, and you revisit it, and it's good. No matter how many times you watch it, it's good from start to finish. It's such a great film. And I feel like it might be slipping out of this generation because it doesn't really, it pops up on like TNT, like randomly, if you're talking about basic cable channels that play commercials in the middle of it. And, it's just where this movie falls in line. And this should be part of most people's collections. If it is not, it's definitely part of mine. I love this film so much.